Okay, so today we are doing security and compliance, part A, which is the IRMS stuff. Bro teaches too many classes with us. That's totally true, but this is not the first time. I've done this before. This is time number two. So what this means is that teacher needs more sleep. Anyways, we'll move on here. So yeah, this is not going to show up in the lab because we've done RMS already kind of in 2515, and I didn't really want to duplicate it that much. Um, let's do this thing. I do teach you too much, though. It's your cohort all the time, except for one class. Okay, so we're not doing in place hold. That was from part B. We're mostly talking about IRM, ADRMS. Okay, now ADRMS you've heard about already, um, which is just Active Directory Rights Management Services, right? IRM is the Exchange section of that. Okay, so it's kind of the client licensing and the client support for ADRMS in Exchange. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about transport rules as well because that's the key way that RMS works in Exchange. Okay, we're not really gonna talk about any of the legal hold and e-discovery because we did that already. So I just split a very long lecture into a couple of less long lectures. Right? Now, even though email has scads of problems associated with it in terms of security, it's still like business just likes it. You know, it's still the primary way of doing all the important stuff in an organization. So there have been calls, going back a long ways for Microsoft to have security features built in to their mail server um, in order to protect data, which that's not so easy to do with email, to be honest. But the ability of people to take data out of the organization, leak it, misuse it, like all of that is a concern for businesses. So Microsoft came up with IRM and ADRMS to help organizations to control their data a little bit better. And we already know how ADRMS works on the server side, right? It can enable um, it can enable things like encryption, but it can also, you have to get a publishing license in order to use it from a centralized server, and you're always talking back to the server to verify if a user is allowed to do certain things, right? Now, this also costs extra money in order to make it work, and that's still true for Exchange. Okay, so um, my own opinion of all of this is that it kind of sets a certain standard of expectation for what people are going to do with documents, etc. It's not really, I would not call it a security tool personally. There's too many ways to bypass it, right? I would liken it to if you have a house and you have a little picket fence in front of your house. The picket fence kind of is a psychological, boundary, which is saying, this is where my property begins. Don't cross the threshold, unless blah, 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 right? So you might put up a sign and say no solicitors or something like that, no solicitations. Um, but people can easily bypass it, right? It just establishes the fact that if somebody does bypass it, they did so knowing what they're doing. It's not a mistake, right? And so I think that what this really goes towards is that people have to jump through hoops to get data out of the organization that's under this level of control, but it's still extremely possible. Okay. So just I'm keeping that caveat in mind in the world of cell phones where you can take pictures of everything and you could do OCR, uh, you know, um, like sort of OCR scanning of documents to turn that into text. Um, I don't really think this is a very robust form of protection. But like I said, it establishes the expectation. So this was introduced in 2007 when, the protections were a little stronger, I would say. And the way that it works is that it taps into something called transport rules. So transport rules is used to be part back then of the transport role. Okay. Um, Nowadays, they've taken all those roles and collapsed them into the mailbox role. So, you're not hosting this on another server. This is just running on any mailbox server that you have. But it's really a portion of Exchange which examines the flow of traffic and can insert agents into that flow to perform certain tasks. Okay. So the main way that we use that is with antivirus and anti-spam, right? Um, they have agents that tap into the transport service and kind of fish out all the data and go through it and sort through it. Okay. Now, all we're doing is that we're inserting another agent into the transport role, um, so that we can now set up something called conditions, right? So uh, triggers essentially is what I would call them. But something that if the agent detects that condition, it will do an evaluation and then perform a certain action. Okay. So it's up to the user to define those actions. It's up to the administrator. And there are templates in place. So we can apply rights management templates that Microsoft has just given us. And they have quite a few of those. So one of those would be like, this is a read-only document, you know, um, do not forward, all that kind of stuff, right? But you can actually combine those together to create a larger custom rule of your own. Okay. So some examples, applying the rights management template, which is the main thing we want to do. But you could do other things with transport rules. Like if you append a disclaimer to a message, uh, let's say sent by a certain group, uh, that's you messing with the transport rules. It's not an RMS activity. Okay. So this one requires special licensing, but there are a few things that you can do with transport rules where you just set up a condition and an action. So in this case, if the condition is something's coming from the sales group, the action would be set up a disclaimer in the email automatically, you know? So, the disclaimer could be, don't listen to these guys. They're BSing you, right? Or take what they say with a grain of salt. But that's not part of rights management per se. That's part of the transport rules. So the transport role is it's an umbrella for a series of things that include rights management. Okay. You can also, search for certain keywords. That's what we do essentially when we're putting things on hold, right? If we put on hold and we say, I want any kind of instance of this keyword to be shunted into another mailbox, uh, that's really making use of transport rules. Okay. So there's a bunch of predefined ones that Microsoft offers. You can create your own custom ones. So create a new rule, right? But all of these are ones that Microsoft has already um, made for you, and then you could just fill in the details in the form about what it is you want to be done, right? So if a certain account, like say the CEO, maybe not the CEO, but he probably wants spam filtering, but maybe like let's say a scanner. Okay, so you have a scanner as a device, and it's going to send mail. You can have that bypass spam filtering because it's a reliable device. It's not going to generate spam, right? So you could tag that as a transport rule for that particular email. And anytime the transport service encounters that particular account, it'll, excuse me, um, it'll just say, okay, so this one doesn't need a spam scan, and it'll skip it. Okay. Now, when you get into integrating RMS with the transport rule, with transport rules, um, that's when you got to pay. Okay, so this is an advanced feature. You need a client access license for this. I used to have an exercise where people would use this, and I got rid of it. Um, Not because it was a problem, but just because it was. I felt it was too close to what we were doing in 2515. But just understand that what we did in 2515, you can apply it to email as well. Okay. So their sales pitch is that it's a Microsoft security tool that provides persistent data protection by enforcing data access policies. Like I said, it's not that hard to bypass. Okay. But it does set the bar in terms of expectations of what is appropriate use and what isn't, right? It also helps to identify users. So if you're smart, you're not actually going to use the system that has ADRMS on it to bypass ADRMS. You'd want to do something like take pictures, right? Not that I'm telling people how to bypass it, but now, in order for all of this to work, you have to have an RMS enabled uh, tool, right? In order to do any enforcement, if I spin up Thunderbird and I connect to Exchange, Thunderbird is not going to enforce these rules. It doesn't really understand them. Okay. Now, what that might mean is that for some documents, Thunderbird wouldn't be able to actually work with the document, right? So when you take it offline, it might be encrypted and you can't do anything with it. But for other things, it just won't enforce whatever rule you have in place. Okay. So RMS can work by locking content so that it can't be edited, or encrypting it so that it can't be opened without, unless you're a certain user. If you take a copy off of the network, you put it onto removable media, say, or like you can block that so that people can't copy the message off. Um, and then, if you try and forward it on, that can be blocked through Outlook, not necessarily through third-party tools, right? So, just as an aside, there's also on the client side, it's possible to mark something as confidential. So that's not the same as what ADRMS is doing. So ADRMS is trying to enforce confidentiality. The mark as confidential is just a tag, which says, hey, it's relying on the honesty of the person. It's like, hey, this is a confidential email. Don't spread it around. That's purely client side. There's no enforcement mechanism, right? With ADRMS, there is an attempt. Like if you actually try and forward something on, it's not going to let you, you know? So it goes quite a bit further than the client side stuff. Now, I've kind of mentioned you need a client tool to be able to make this work, and that's Office and Outlook, right? There's a kind of a back and forth that's going on with the server and the client all the time, right? There's constant checks for what is it that I'm allowed to do? Can this user have access to this document? Am I allowed to forward? That kind of stuff. And so it is a centralized service, but it does rely on the client side to actually do all of the enforcement in the end, right? That's something just to keep in mind. So RMS allows for the control of email messages. It will prevent forwarding within that ecosystem. Okay. So you have to step out of that in order to bypass it. Now, ADRMS, we already know about that. We need that server running on the network. It needs to be accessible. If you're trying to arrange for people to be able to use it outside of your organization, then you have to make it available outside of your organization, right? With online exchange, they still have ADRMS. They don't really talk about it as much. It's more just, do you want to control this document? But online exchange is inherently external, right? And so people can take things home, and so long as they're using their account and their license, they can authenticate against the online service, and they can, it can be enforced essentially, right? Yeah, on premises, you want to set up RMS on a domain member server, not on a DC, not on an Exchange server. it does quite a lot of work. So you don't really want to duplicate that anywhere. You just want to make it a specialized server because it's receiving a lot of requests potentially. Okay. And so then you mix and match rules with the templates that are available to you, or you create your own custom ones. And then you can control what they can open with Word, what they can open with Outlook, Excel, all of that stuff. Okay. And the RMS server is the one that's kind of like the emperor, it's like yes or no about access to whatever actions the user wants to try and perform. So when recipients, they try to open the content, they get verified by the RMS server based on certificates, right? And the existence of a license that which they ask for the first time they connect, right? Which will let them decrypt the content. So after you install RMS, you allow Exchange server permissions to read and execute the server certification file, which is in IIS. It's a particular ASP file, which all users have to be able to have access to. Okay, so it's not just running it's not just on the RMS server. The Exchange server has to be able to have access to this. Okay. There's also an RMS super users group, which I did talk about earlier in 2515. Um, you still need that, but you've got to actually add it to Exchange as well. Okay. There's an account called the Federated Email Mailbox, which exists in Exchange on-prem, uh, but it's disabled by default. So you have to enable it, and in order for RMS to work. Okay, and then you have to add it to this super user group. Okay? And that basically allows Exchange as a system to interact with RMS. Okay? And then you can apply the pre-built templates. So, for example, do not forward, or just make your own at that point. Okay. So here's just some examples, but we're not really going to play with it too much in this class. I kind of decided to just make it a theory topic. Once you have your templates, then you enable IRM licensing for the clients. The way that works is you just turn it on the server, okay? The clients, when they next connect in, they will see that it's enabled, and they'll start behaving like it's enabled, okay? So it's not like you have to run around from machine to machine to be able to turn this on. You turn it on the server, you're done, okay? Um, Now, IRM is just the client portion of ADRMS. So it's information rights management. It's really just the client features within Office and other parts of Outlook and all of that. Any of the client tools that support it, um, there's a separate license within them that has to be enabled, but that gets detected by seeing that the server is using IRM. Okay. If you like what we would do in classes, we would just run off of a trial, so we wouldn't have to worry about it, right? But if you're actually running a production on-premises service, you'd actually have to um, pay for some client access licenses for IRM licensing, and then enable it for those users. Okay, so as soon as you exceeded that number, you'd have to buy more, essentially. In online exchange, it depends what type of license you buy for your users. So if you need to enable this, then you've got to upgrade the licenses if they're not already IRM capable. Okay. So there are different categories online that you could buy. You just end up paying a bit more per user in that case, right? So this is the RMS component for the clients, right? And for most our purposes, it's mostly Microsoft Outlook. Okay. So all you have to do, set IRM configuration is the command. And there's internal and external licensing, which are both Boolean values. You set them to true, depending what you want to enable. So if you just want to enable it within the organization, just enable internal licensing. If you want to enable it outside the organization, then you also have to enable external licensing, and you have to make the service available to the rest of the world, right? That's maybe, if you never want stuff to leave the organization, you might not turn on external. You might just leave it like this, and that's what we did. Okay. If, on the other hand, you have a lot of road warriors, then you might want to turn it on so that they can continue to do their work. Okay, so when it comes to actually creating a new rule, you go to the rules section in order to create a new rule, and you select apply rights protection messages. All these other ones are just transport rules. Okay, so they do, modify the flow of data in exchange, but they're not separately licensed like this is. Okay, so if you want to work with RMS, you select this. And one of the defaults is the do not forward. That's one of the templates. Apply this rule if the sender is, you add a condition, you select a user, right? Here it's saying Bob Smith. That's just the friendly name of the user. So you'd usually get a second pop-up where you'd select the user that you wanna choose, right? And then do the following. So you apply rights protection, and then you can add an action. You could select from within that, and there's a whole bunch of default options that you can choose. Okay. So here's an example where we've got do not forward as one, ADRMS rule that you have in place. You can see that there's quite a few other ones, right? Some of these have to do with compliance. So they're not necessarily purely ADRMS. These could just be transport rules. Okay, so this one is an ADRMS rule, but you have to dig in to figure out what each of them is doing. Okay, and if there's a conflict between them, you can set priorities. So the lower down you are, the lower the priority of the rule. Okay, which means Pipeda, it basically overrules do not forward. Okay, if they're in conflict in some way. Okay. Some rules can be applied before an email leaves the sender's mailbox. And in Exchange Online, we do come across something like that where we create a mail tip. And what a mail tip does is it, if let's say you're sending an email to a particular person and that person's on vacation, they could set up an auto reply that says, I'm on vacation. But what that means is that when you send a message, it has to go through the server and through all the transport service, get into the user's mailbox, and then an auto reply is generated, and then that has to be redelivered to you. So if you want to reduce that kind of wasted um, activity, you can set up what's called a mail tip, where you can just tag and say that person's on vacation. And when someone starts to create a message and puts their name in the to box, then they'll get an automatic little pop-up which will say that user is on vacation until this time. And so the client's never even sent an email yet. So you can bypass potentially a lot of wasted traffic just by using the transport service in a bit of a creative way, right? So that person can then say, okay, well, I'll just send them a mail later. I won't send it right now, you know. So that relies on the Outlook client itself to do that, and it's the same thing with RMS. You can implement certain protections ahead of time. So if it seems like someone's about to send a mail that they're like a forward a mail that they're not supposed to, RMS will just be like before it even gets sent, right? So those are Outlook protection rules. You can create those on the server, um, but they only get enforced client side. Right? Okay, that's it for ADRMS. We're not really going to cover it in the lab or in the quiz, that, which are the last two assessments we have. Sorry, my voice is, there's something wrong with it today. I don't know what it is. But just as a heads up, uh, I do have quiz 4 coming. I don't know if anybody has an interest in moving it forward a little bit, maybe, because then we could end the course earlier. Yes. Okay. Let's see. On Friday, the What is that? Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. The sixth? Oh, wait. No. Can I do that? Yes, I can. I think I can. There's one other thing, which I might as well talk about now. But yeah, I'm just gonna put that in your I'll put that bug in your ear and then we can talk about it. No, it's not a it's not a big deal. And it's not going to affect this class, but I think on Wednesday, the 4th of December, uh, so that would affect what class would that affect? Forensics. Um, I have to go and be a witness at court. I got a subpoena, so um, I don't really have a choice in the matter. So I'll be MIA for that particular day. So I'll get somebody to cover. But just so you know, I'll be missing for one day towards the end here, unless they put it off. They've already put it off once already. But so far I have a summons, so I have to go. Okay. Just a heads up. I'll send an email later. But just so you know, that particular day you won't be able to reach me. Okay. Now, next class, I think I'm going to be doing retention policies. I'm going to bump that up over here. And then this will just be a work period. Hopefully, this will be a quiz, this DBA. Okay. But we'll see. Former NATE student did something, and man knows NATE. Yeah, they're consulting on NATE students. That's right. I'm a NATE student expert. No, it was actually an interesting thing. It was like I'm at home right now, so just there's a bakery near my house, and I was on a walk, and there was a car that was parked next to the bakery, and a lady drove her car into the wall of the bakery, like kind of a third of the way in. Her car was a third of the way in, um, into their kitchen. So, and then she pulled out and then kind of backed up and just sat there for a little while. And then after about 3 minutes, she took off like a bat out of hell. And she started driving like really sporadically, like kind of weird. So I managed to get a photo of her license plate while she was driving away. So it turns out that means I have to go to court now. So, but yeah. Anyways, it was excitement at that time. But that was like 2 years ago. So last year I was supposed to go, and then they put it off, and now I don't even remember a lot of the details anymore. Like that's about all I remember, really. So, but I guess I have the photo. Hey, Yeg Wave. I don't even know what Yeg Wave is, man. What's Yeg Wave? Is that just where like exciting things are posted? All right. I'll let you guys go. Have yourselves a good hour and a half, I guess, unless you need help. Okay. If you're having any problems with assignment four, sorry, lab two, let me know. Yeah. See you later. I'm gonna get me a coffee.